And we're continuing with the 12th chapter of Dragons in the Waters, which is called The Return of the Phair. There had been scant pickings for breakfast, or for lunch, as Simon and Canon Tallis carefully culled the bare handful of berries that made up their meals. They drank the milk from the last coconut, and chewed on a few greens, which Simon recognized as being like the edible greens around Phair, picked by Aunt Leonis and cooked with a little white bacon. But cooked greens and greens raw are quite different. These tasted bitter, though at least they contained a little water and were worth chewing for that alone. For the coconut milk did little to assuage their thirst. Simon knew that if it had not been for Canon Tallis, he would long ago have cupped up water from the brook. "If Gutierrez is the type I think he is," the canon said, "he would choose a place with no safe water supply. Murder by indirection is what he's after." "We've got to have something more to eat," Simon said. "I'll have to go a little farther." "No, Simon. You went beyond voice range last time and almost got lost." "But I didn't get lost. I got back." "You might not the next time. It's not worth the risk of being separated. I know neither of us cares if we never see another coconut. But we can survive on them for a while longer if you'll climb another tree, and by tomorrow I'll be able to walk." Simon knew that Canon Tallis did not think much of the boy's chances of surviving alone in the jungle. "And I've never been a Boy Scout or anything," he acknowledged. "Aunt Leonis and I have led very sedentary lives." He could recognize a water moccasin or a rattler or a coral snake. He did not think much of his ability to fight off a wild boar single-handed. By mid-afternoon it was apparent to both of them that the priest's wound was worsening. Despite frequent fresh dressings of cool leaves, the wound became steadily more inflamed and suppurating. The flush of fever rose boldly in the canon's cheeks. He reached up to the woven sun hat covering his bald pate. "I think I must have a touch of sun." "You have fever, sir?" "Yes, perhaps I have." "You're not going to be able to walk by morning, sir?" The priest did not answer. Around them the jungle noises seemed to increase, to draw closer. They heard hoots, clucks, cackles, hisses, screeches, growlings. "They smell my wound," Canon Tallis said. "If Hurtado has not found us by tomorrow, you had better leave me here and head for the sea. Do you know how to guide yourself by sun and wind?" "I've never had to, but as you said, necessity makes a good teacher. I'll do my best to." He broke off as there was a crescendo of noise and activity, and a sudden screeching of birds flying high up into the air above the jungle. Near their clearing, twigs cracked, leaves rustled, a branch creaked. Then, above them, Simon saw eyes, great obsidian eyes and a cat-shaped face. The body was spotted and rippled with muscles, tense to spring. "Run!" Canon Tallis ordered. "Simon, run!" Blind with terror, Simon ran. Geraldo would not leave his hot box of a galley. He stood at the sink and washed cups and saucers, which did not need washing. His face was stained with tears. Polly hovered. "I know you didn't do it, Harold." Tears gathered again in Geraldo's dark eyes. He blew his nose. Or I know he didn't do it, Harold. Tears gathered again in Geraldo's dark eyes. He blew his nose. "But," Polly asked hesitantly, "why did he lie about the key to cabin 5? Jan does not lie." "You still think he's covering up for somebody?" Geraldo shrugged. "You think he'll go on covering even if he's hanged for it? Or whatever they do in Venezuela?" Geraldo hunched his shoulders upward again. "And the portrait," Polly said. "How did the portrait get off the Orion and into the Omara's house at Dragon Lake?" "It could be done," Geraldo said slowly. "A fishing boat could come close enough so that a strong swimmer could get to the Orion unseen." "Unseen by radar?" "Yes, it is possible." "And then what? From the lower deck where the pilot comes on, from there the portrait could easily be lowered into the water, and you said that it is painted on wood." "That's what Simon said, so it would float. But wouldn't the salt water hurt it?" "Perhaps not if it were only for a short time, and it were to be cleaned off immediately." Polly looked at him admiringly. "You've really thought it all out, haven't you? It seemed necessary." "Have you told Commandant Hurtado?" Again, Geraldo shrugged. I did not think that it would help Jan. You mean it's something Jan could have done? Jan or the man who tried to push Simon overboard, and I have no doubt that the senior commandant could figure this much out for himself. He does not need me to tell him. But we don't know what he said to Jan, or what Jan said to him. We know enough. Jan was not quiet. He was heard. He swore he had nothing to do with it. Any of it. And Simon and Uncle Father? The tears began to flow down Geraldo's cheeks. He spoke over a sob. I do not understand. The Commandant Hurtado. I thought he was a man of wisdom. Why has he not found them and brought them out to the Orion? We do not even know if they are alive. Polly put her hand over Geraldo's mouth. Stop, stop, she wondered at her own dry eyes. Charles sought out Hurtado and was finally summoned up onto the bridge, where the policeman had been talking with the captain. You want to see me? Hurtado asked. Yes, please, I had a dream last night. Hurtado wiped his hand over his somber jaw. It is late for dreams. Please, I saw a man being handcuffed. And it was not Jan, because Jan was crying for the man. Who was it then? It was a man in a winter uniform with his cap pulled down. I do not know who it was, but it was not Jan. Your dreams do not tell you enough. But my dreams have never lied, and it was not Jan who was being handcuffed, because Jan was there, weeping for whoever it was. Hurtado spoke heavily. Charles, I have to trust the evidence. But it was not Jan. I know it was not Jan. Hurtado reminded him. You yourself said that dreams do not hold up in court. I'll speak to you later, Charles. I have work to do. Simon and Uncle Father? Charles asked. Have you found them? Hurtado looked over the boy's head, not meeting his blue eyes. A party of Cristianos is searching for them, and they can move in the jungle where no white man can manage. But you think they're all right? Now their eyes met. I will not think otherwise. Simon did not know how long or how far he ran in his panic, crashing through underbrush, not thinking of scorpion or snake, not feeling the lash of vines cutting across his face. At last, the density of the jungle itself stopped him. He had run into a wall of trees and bushes laced together by vines. He stood, still panting, his heart thudding wildly. Sweat suddenly poured out of him, while his mouth and throat were parched. He had run away. He had run away from Canon Talus with his wounded leg. He had run away from whatever kind of wildcat it was which had been about to leap on them. He had abandoned Canon Talus, incapable of protecting himself, left him to be killed. He had thought only of saving his own life. Suddenly he was furious with Quentin Phair. If you had run away from Dragon Lake, if you hadn't run away from Dragon Lake, I'd never have run away from Uncle Father. If you'd been where you ought to be, then I'd never have deserted my friend. It's your blood in my veins that's responsible. No, he could hear Aunt Leonis, as clearly as though she were there in the jungle beside him. Ultimately, your decisions are yours, Simon. You have a goodly heritage, but it is up to you to live up to it. Quentin Phair cannot make you brave in an emergency. You have to condition your own reflexes of braveness. If Quentin Phair could not make him brave, neither could he make him a betrayer. But I'm blood of your blood, Quentin, he thought bitterly. His anger ebbed, leaving him spent and heavy of heart. He began to walk. He had no idea in which direction he had run, or if he was heading toward or away from the clearing. He was afraid of returning to the clearing, afraid of what he might find there. But he had run away, there was no evading that, and the only thing left to do was to return. He knew that it would be too late, but it was still what he had to do. Shortly after lunch, Gutierrez appeared. His mother had recovered from her illness. The sight of her son had given her renewed strength. Vermeer, staying on the Orion in Hurtado's absence, greeted him effusively, rejoicing over the miraculous recovery of El Señor Jefe de Policia Gutierrez's beloved. Mother. And I am happy to tell you, my dear Gutierrez, that Hurtado has made a definitive arrest. All our troubles are over. Gutierrez's surprise was as large as Vermeer's sympathy. But who can it be? Never have I known so complex a problem. When Vermeer told him, he said, Of course, I should have guessed. I have been suspecting that young man of indulging in smuggling for some time, but could not pin anything definite on him. Smuggling as well as murder and theft and kidnapping, Vermeer exclaimed. Gutierrez rubbed his pudgy hands together. It explains much. Does it? Why does smuggling explain the murder? The Bolivar portrait, Gutierrez said. That is an extremely valuable portrait. If Jan were caught stealing the portrait by Mr. Phair, then he would be forced to dispose of him. There is much profit to be made from stolen art treasures. You think Jan was part of a ring of art thieves? It is likely, is it not? And what about the boy and the Englishman? Gutierrez moved his face into distressed lines. They have not, of course, been found? Not yet. We know more or less where they are. The Cristianos saw smoke in the interior of the jungle, and a party is out looking for them. We expect them to be found shortly. A happy issue to all our problems, Gutierrez said, but he did not sound happy. Pray do excuse me, Senor Counsel, but I must get back to my job. I wanted to come directly to the Orion, but now there is work to be done, all the daily routines to be picked up. When Gutierrez had bustled off, greeted at the gangplank by what seemed to be hundreds of waiting minions, Vermeer went out onto the dock and spoke to a man who was lounging in the shade of his truck. During the afternoon, the pain in Canon Talus's leg had become so acute that he knew he was not going to be able to keep it from the boy much longer. As his fever mounted, his mind began to remind him of a movie camera. Sometimes everything was close up, clear, each detail visible. Then the camera would move back so that all was far away. When he became aware of the beast in the tree above them, crouched to spring, he viewed it as from an incredible distance, as through the wrong end of a telescope. He knew that he could not run. He heard himself calling to Simon to run, and then he crossed himself and prepared to die. His life did not flash before him. After all, he was not drowning. But he had a quiet feeling of pleasure that his life had been rich in experience and friendship and the love of God. He closed his eyes. Then he heard a thwack and a scream and a thud, and the wildcat dropped from the tree, dead, an arrow piercing its heart. The Smiths sat in the shadow of the canvas canopy on the promenade deck. "That nice, Jan," Mrs. Smith said. It is hard to believe." Not many who knew us in Burlington would ever have suspected that I was once so involved in gambling that I nearly ruined our lives. "But murder! I cannot see Jan as a murderer." Mr. Smith patted her hand gently. "The human heart is too often an ugly thing, Patty. There are not many gentle souls like you. If it hadn't been for you, I would have ruined us." "I knew what you were really like," Mrs. Smith said. "You're a good man, Odell, and I love you." "You've made me what I am, Patty. You gave me the courage to stand up to Phair and refuse to be blackmailed. I love you too, and just as much as I did 50 years ago." They sat holding hands and smiling at each other, and did not even notice Dr. Eisenstein looking at them with a rather wistful expression. And we will pause there.